Hello, Kumu here. So, on to the next step of Python, at least the basics of Python. For Python, it's pretty easy once you get everything set up to at least overlook details or you can say forget things unless you do it in a particular way that you can recall it. So, like in the first video, which was I'm not sure exactly how long ago, what I covered was setting up Python, installing Python, installing an IDE to code with Python. There's many ways of coding Python, as I've said before. There's no wrong code. There is codes with like security issues that isn't exactly wrong, but can cause a lot of problems to be wrong. And for the next things to do after we've installed Python, printed, tested stuff, showing stuff to the console to the terminal, the next step will be, in a sense, the variables that we can going to be using or creating, or other types of variables or classes. And since we're going to first start with variables, we're going to do as well as if statement, which is help getting into logic for Python. So I'm going to create a new file in PyCharm for, I'm going to label it variables. I'm going to do _0 since I have learned coding, do not label certain files so like other modules in Python. So like if we import a module, this is an example, the IDE will help autocorrect and auto find modules for you, which is nice. Random. It's a module in Python, has a bunch of tools or pre-built-in tools, variables to coding, to logic, to even functions, which we'll get into at a later point. If you named a Python file random, so random.py, it will try to draw from a pre-existing and maybe overwrite stuff. It's caused me issues. There was no exact warning for it. So I'm a fool at times. I'm not claiming to be a genius. Um, though I have said before, if I had a memory, I would be a genius. So things I want to go over in this is variables and if. I know, awkward segue. I'm not the most straightforward person. I have my quips, my qualms. And first things first, I'm going to get into variables. So I'm just going to make a new variable, which is essentially a placeholder for information. That's not probably the correct wording for it, but it's a way to have information stored in a way to remember it other than having a whole different types of information. So like or as I've demonstrated, we can make a what's called a string using colon or double colon and as in like the hello YouTube, hello world examples. And we can label it as, let's say, a string, which can help you remember it's a string. So now we have a variable with a string. So if we print that variable, or in this case var, and I've changed this to use current file just to make it easier instead of going to the current file. I've had problems with that too before. So when we print string, or say it printed string from my variable. So this variable right here holds a string type object. And Python has a bunch of different types of, let's say, types, classes. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. So let's say a number or a boolean. Sorry, it's always fun to say. There's other types of things to use as well. So if we had a variable of a list or a variable of a dictionary, there's other types as well. So these types are pre-built into Python to be used. So we have a string, which I'm going to use a pound symbol or hashtag, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Or not pronounce it, sorry. Classify it as is the better way of saying it, to make a comment. This is a string variable. If I get spelling wrong or type too quickly, I may make mistakes. Sorry. So this comment right here will tell me, if I come back to it, this comment is a string variable. No, no, that's not right. This variable is a string. Let me correct that. But what am I doing? I'm highlighting stuff and moving stuff without meaning to. So variable, this is a string. Not the best way to remember it, would it? But another way of doing it, instead of just leaving a comment for all these, is I can just do a variable string, or an str is string, or at least shorthand. Wait, oh, PyCharm's giving me the autocorrect to help me with other variables for later down the road. And I'm just going to change these to Boolean um, to make it easier for you to remember these variables or to be used later. So I now have a variable that contains a string, a variable that contains an integer, a variable that contains a Boolean, a variable that contains a list, and a variable that contains a dictionary. These all have different types of uses. For one, as we saw earlier, we printed the variable that was labeled as var. Now we have an error. Since we do not have that variable anymore, we have to correct the variable down here. So so I add a little quick comment to say this will print string. And I should do this just to clarify string, and I could say as a string. But sometimes overcomplicating things is not the best way to do things. If it's complicated, there's probably an easier way to do it. Or there's another way of looking at it that makes it less complicated. So as I've seen, or what I've added to make it easier to read is called white spaces to a terminology to break things up, make it easier to see. Like how on this left-hand side there's a file structure. For variables, the easiest way to do them is name them to what they're going to be. So like a variable string, you can name it just string if there is no other variable out there. As I've said, there's classes, there's stuff that correlate with each other. So if I type in or int for like integer, there's already a built-in variable called int, or in this case, a class. And PyCharm will help show ones that you may want to use. So it finds all the ints. So it found the int class, the var int, which is the one I created, and so that will help. But since integer is not just for a class, so like integer, if we highlight it as like a function, so the parentheses right here, yes, that is correct. So if we take the integer or int as a function, it can tell us what it is to a degree. So like highlighting it, it's a built-in class of int, and it gives you like details like how if we would go to the documentation, and you can get a link to the documentation if you want it in a different format or probably an easier way to find other information for it. But PyCharm makes it easy and helps. So like we have an integer called int, or sorry, a function called int. Wording tough, mind going 100 miles per hour. So we can convert a number. Oh, I'm moving my mouse too quickly. Depending on where you highlight, it can give you different information. So if we have an int function, it will convert a number or a string to an integer or return 0 if no arguments. So if I did something like this, the int function will convert that to a number if I'm reading this correctly. If I'm not, shocking, which right here we got 77. So all this did was convert this string into an integer. So that we can get to at a different time, different date. I just wanted to make that clarified to that we don't accidentally overwrite a built-in function. So if I did this, you can see there's an error called string object is not callable. It overwrited the int function that's built into Python with the local scope or global scope, depending on how you want to think of it, of this Python file. So just to clarify, naming variables as unique as possible, but not too complicated you can't remember. So I'm going to get rid of some of this information, but I'm going to go on to the next step of the if statement, which I've looked into a little bit from the documentation. But if we go to the documentation, it tells us straight away a lot of information for it. If, while, for statements, as it says traditionally, control flow constructors. So just think more logic. So if you have if, the keyword, if we do it in PyCharm and highlight it, you get most of the same information, probably easier to read and quicker to read than the documentation. So if I ever try to think logic, as in most cases, if you think logic or something is true or false or a Boolean, because a Boolean can either be true or false. Um, oh, and the reason why true is capitalized, some keywords need to be case sensitive and or case sensitive. There's a lot of different ways of terminology or term for. So case sensitive is capital. Um, so if was uppercase, it's treated as a variable, not a keyword due to how Python interprets in how the IDE interprets if. So if I wanted a variable if, I can type if variable, or I can just do if equals if. So if I do a keyword if to start my logic, if I do the variable if, which equals something that needs to be true, could be something like another type, like a string, a boolean, or an integer, or a list, or a dictionary. Sorry about that. We have to check it against something. You don't technically need to check it against something. You can just see if it's true. And so if I just printed, and if I switch between quotes, single quotes and double quotes, so it habits depending on the situation of how and when I code. So if I check to see if is true, all this is doing to check to see if is actually something. So if it's true, so does it contain any data? Oh, so if worked or work if. Sorry, I got that backwards. So let me now actually change this something to something else. Let's do another keyword in Python called none, which sets the variable to none, which but keeps it as a variable where we can change later, which helps set up a bunch of variables to be used at a particular point. So like I could have data, oop, typing too quickly again. So I can set the data later in a function, which will be at a later date, but it just will help me set up a bunch of variables that I will want to use later. So like I can use a time variable or next frame variable or something similar to that. But to make sure, if I check now, oh, what happened to worked if? It's gone. This is checking to see if is true. So if I do if is none, this is the logic, right? Logic. If equals none. There's another keyword here that we're using called is. And is helps with certain things of if is none. It's equivalent to if equals none. And I don't use is that much. I use it most of the times for certain things like right here. Is none. I could just do equal equal, but preferably that's oh, I keep moving too quickly. So compromisations, my wording, sorry. So it helps to compare. So if something is true and false. So just like how equal equals. So let me see if equal equal does the same thing or not. See, comparison is none with form. Hmm. Oh no. So essentially, it just makes it so some certain keywords require to use equal equal compared to none because a type of none, as it says, is none. So it's nothing. So I can't check nothing versus something. It will give an error. But it does work, but it's just better to throw in is just because of how it's trying to check to see if something is true or false. So let me switch a few things around, change a few things up. So since let me get rid of these. So let me do name, and I'm going to use the name I like to use. So name equal Johnny. My name is Jonathan. I like to go by Johnny. So I'm going to check to see if name, the name variable, is equal to, let's say, another string to, let's say, string. And I can print out the variable name afterwards to make sure it's correct. I can also add others arguments or variables into print, which I'll get into another later date as well about functions. And for like print can accept a whole host of variables and other things like you can highlight and read. It's best to always look into it and try to figure out if you break something, don't panic. That's how you learn. Because if you can't fix what you broke, then you're not learning. Make mistakes, just make sure it's in a way that's not going to break your setup. I've almost done that a few times with a while loop, which I'll get into another later date. So I'm going to check to see if name. So if name equals string, it's going to print the name. So this should be printed. Is this true? Is this true? Yes or no? If it's true, we'll get print. Wait, nothing was printed. So name does not equal string then. Okay, so what if we change this string to Johnny? No capitalization. Wait, that didn't also print either. It's because, as in the same as variables and something that's getting compared, it needs to be case sensitive or capital sensitive. So name has to equal Johnny. There's other ways to checking name. So we can add a few things to name as like find, join, count, a bunch of other ones. Capitalization, there's a bunch of things we'll go into and look into and test and mess around with. A lot of things I don't use personally, or not offhand, since I'm still learning. But let's look at capitalization. It returns a capital, or sorry, it returns a capitalized version of the string. More specifically, makes the first character have a uppercase and the rest lowercase. So essentially, it takes this and turns it to an uppercase if it wasn't. So let me switch that around. If name equals capitalized function, it still doesn't print. And now let me see if I change this. Is this true? Oh, Johnny was printed, but it's not capitalized. It's taking the variable, it's modifying it, and returning a version of it. So it's, as it says here, a little string. We'll get into that at a later date as well. I'm just messing around and giving information and context for things to look at, to test, and try and learn. For if, there's also, if you highlight if again, there's else if and else, which helps to test something else. So let me do an else if and a if, or sorry, else if and else. The else if does need a statement or something to test against. So like name, let me do name again, equals Johnny. And then since this is true, this is going to be ran first, then this will be ran, and then this will be ran. Let me get rid of this capitalization. And then, so let me go here. Sorry, it's hard to text, oh, not text, but type and portray what I'm doing for my code. Just everyone has a way of doing things. Find your groove for it. If you don't need to speak, don't need to speak. If you want to speak, speak. Say things out loud. Run through the logic as well. So like if name equals Johnny, and let's do actually with some context to that too. If Johnny is with a capital J, then it should run this print statement with name or the name variable. Then it goes down to else if name with Johnny with no capital J, it should print this. And I'm not going to try to spell certain words, just memorization to sounding things out. My bad. So capitalization, there's an easy way to do that too. I could just do cap. You saw nothing. Um, oh, okay. If Johnny is not capitalized, or capitalization, capitalize, my brain, focus. So if Johnny is not capitalized, or is not capital, I'll say, so it should print this. So I've gone through the logic. If name equals, if else if name equals, and then else I've not talked about yet. Else is if none of these are true, it still at least displays information if you want it to or not. I can comment this out, which on PyCharm, if you highlight every line and hit Control then backslash, which I will say this is backslash, this is forward slash. A lot of people, even myself included, I'll get these mixed up. Just think of next to the right shift if you're on the US keyboard. If it's on a different keyboard, different layout, my bad. Just think of top right to forward or forward to back. If I'm getting both these mixed up, my bad. And then if you highlight it again and then hit the same control backslash, and now my mind's just whirring. Okay, this is forward slash, not backslash, because it's going forward to backwards, or it's going to the front. It's too many things to remember, too many things to recall. This world has there, and there, two, and two, where, and where. Just joking. But how you can remember it, how you prefer to remember it, you can always change these shortcuts as well to help. Like, I have stuff on my mouse that can help me that I need to change LED because I haven't changed them yet, to be able to shrink code or extend code. We'll get into the another date as well. But enough ranting, enough side talk. Or not side talk, but side conversation. If, if I keep rambling, please don't call me out on it. I know it. My mind knows it. It's a bad habit. And it makes me who I am. So I can't judge you. If I would something the wrong way, don't take it personally. If the context is wrong, my bad. It's just how people are, well, unique. And you can always think of it the same way as logic in code. If my name, so I can always name this my name, which since it's not a variable, we have to change the initial variable as well, which we have to change all of these. But Python and PyCharm, but especially PyCharm, has a way to rename or customize all uses of name and edit it, which I've never used Alt-Enter before for that. Oh, it just brings up this, okay. But you can always click on this little O and rename the uses of name to my name, which helps change a whole list of variables in a file. And so if I ever change name or variable to be more specific to that tax, well, I can have a whole bunch of placeholder variables as I've done up here. A placeholder variable for variable string, integer, boolean, list, etc., etc., etc. And I have one for my name. And instead of going through all the lines of code, which, let me just hold the enter key real quick. Okay, I suddenly have 125 lines to go through. And if I copy and paste this, which is going to be horrible, but let me get rid of all of this real quick just to make it easier to do it. Da da da. Print. So now I have a bunch of code. This is really hard to read, hard to distinguish everything. There are some shortcuts to help format lines with PyCharm. If you do Control Alt and L, which it didn't really do much just due to how everything's set up. So now I have all these lines of code that I have to go through, and I have a variable that's linking to all of them. So like my name. I change the variable name, but forget to do it. PyCharm will notify me with a lot of red. That's a lot of red. But so let me change this one. Alright, I'll change this one, and oh, I didn't change this one either. This will take some time. It's always easier to go and change it. and it makes this significantly faster to change everything. Even if you click on a variable, it's all highlighted. And the same can't be done with the string, integer, and stuff like that. It can only work with variables. So now, if I print this, I don't know how many times I have this copied. It should go through all of these statements and print. Yeah. How many times does that one do? Alright. So, let me get rid of all of this. That's all sloppy code. I can't really get anything. Life is life. So, code, as I've said, does not need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be secure, but I would say if you can't read the code, can't understand the code, and there's a security flaw in it, try to first go through the logic, find all of it, give yourself comments to find it. Secure code is not always the best code. If it works for you, it works. But if there's a vulnerability down the road and you don't know where that security flaw is, either you don't understand the code you've written or you've used snippets of other code, which is another term that is harder to puzzle or piece together unless you know what it is. Long story short, snippets of code are basically other ways of saying reusable code, essentially a function in a different way. As in, I'll get into that later today. I'm rambling again. Excuse me. So, what we've covered so far is variables, which I'm going to put some more white space up here to make this easier to read. So, for the string variable, so in plus PyCharm helps a lot for a few things. If you highlight certain things, it'll tell you there's too many blank spaces or white space, and however you want to think of it. When you getting tongue tied again. Control Alt L, it will get rid of all that white space. But if we highlight variables, it'll tell you variable is a string and the little string, and we can always click on it. As I've said, classes. So the class string is a sequence of strings or characters, bytes, buffer, however you want to word it, creates a new string object from the given object. So this string right here is essentially, this is a string now as well. You can always change strings as well. So, let me go right here and go name equals name, or my name in this case, and I want to capitalize it. Okay, so now I have a variable called name again, which should equal a string of Johnny. I don't need to rehash it, but I can check to make sure this is true. So, and then I'm going to use a neat trick that PyCharm and Python and however you want to say it, add the variable and denote. So, and since this is name cannot be, can be undefined, it's just referring to name is inside another block of code that's not accessible in the local scope or global scope of, depending on a function or file. So if I play this or run this code, it still runs, just be wary of that. That's why I've mentioned earlier, make a placeholder code or placeholder variable in your code, like none, which makes it more global compared to a local. I'll get into that at a later date as well, just which will get rid of some errors. So, as I've said, I will ramble, my bad. So, most of that right there is the if. We'll get into other keywords as mentioned earlier and seen earlier in the documentation for compound statements. And if you're a person that can read everything and understand everything, if you're a hands-on person, mess with it. Make a whole logic puzzle for yourself if you need to. You can always test yourself. There's a lot of different ways to learn. I'm self-taught. I may not be the best at remembering certain things. If I do it constantly, it's fresh in my mind. And first things first, sorry, I've probably said that multiple times, but hopefully this just explains or breaks down information that's puzzling. Because I've been in the tutorial hell, and that's probably mentioned in a lot of videos if you go through a lot of tutorial videos. This is for me. I've done it. I've seen it. I personally like doing things hands-on, understanding things hands-on, seeing how it interacts. So key, bleh, the key to keywords are how they are used in Python. So if, if, else, those three keywords right there are going to be used quite a bit. Else will be used in different situations as well, but in this context, it goes, is this true? If it is, it will print this first. Then it will check, oh, hitting too fast again. Then it will check this else if statement if to see which one's true. If it can't find any of those to be true, it will go to the else. And I need to turn that off before I forget because typos. But I'll do that off camera. Will print this if nothing is true, or nothing, yes, nothing is true. Wording and logic, two pieces, two puzzles. Your brains, my brain, we all work in mysterious ways. This helps me understand. You can make many comments, but you can always do another way of doing it is if you get into a whole bunch of strings that you're doing for a logic check, have a way of identifying the line. I could do 12, which this is an integer, and the print will act as accordingly. 12 is nothing, since nothing was there. Let me go 13, or in this case 14, and then 17. If I will print this now, you can see 14, 14. Since this was not true, it will go to this one, and you'll see 14. That just is a way to help you identify when you're having error checking the logic to the puzzle in some cases, or code you're running. As like down here as well. Johnny is, oh, Johnny. You don't have to do it this way. There's other ways of doing it. There's what's called ANSI, which I'm going to spell out because it's easier to read. ANSI, ANSI. There'll be escape characters that we can use to colorize code as well later. And I'll just use an example. 32M. Oop, I put BA. So this essentially will turn to a color and change a color. And let me reset that before. So what this is doing is just coloring the code. Johnny should be red, if I remember correctly. Oh, I have a variable that's not even correct, so I'm getting an error. It doesn't work with this emulator. All right. Oh, no, I have it backwards. I'm thinking of one x1b. I'm thinking b1. But so as you can see, Johnny is now green. This can be helpful for like using it in error situations. So essentially, like if something's not true, so if I say this right here, Johnny is, I don't even know what that is. Oh, I'm getting a typo though. Typos, it's not a typo. Is now it'll go through the logic of is my name or my name variable is this, then this. If none of those are true, it'll go to this. And a good way of doing is do a color of red, which is not red. 31 is red. Which these are ANSI. I'll go into a lot more detail, but just a way to help you remember or check logic if need to in certain colors. And there are quite a few colors. So, sorry, I had to breathe real quick. My talking too much and can't can't stop talking at times. Sorry about that. So we have, or I have explained variables, some information about what variables can hold of strings, booleans, integers, classes, dictionary. Lists and dictionaries, I'll get into a different point. I've gone over if, else if, which you can think of the else if as you can see else if, but to make it easier to remember or control in most is you take the first two letters of else, add if that helps. And if, I don't even know how to say that, but hopefully this has first explained, I know I'm rambling, hopefully this logic has gave some information on to what the first things we do in most, or at least most code for me I need to do, is the logic. How or what this code needs to be doing. Sometimes making information or variables to know I'm going to be using or need to be using or may not even use yet, like the name. Name equals none. And you can always put it down here too. Yeah. But sadly for PyCharm, for me, typos, yes, there's going to be a lot of typos. I'll turn that off. And so I'm rambling again. I don't know how many times I've said that. It's going to be stuck in my head. But so hopefully that explains some information about variables in Python and how if the keyword for Python will help with logic. And we touched a little bit on the not is keyword, which is a lot helpful for certain keywords like none. There's also other keywords like not and sorry, case sensitive, so not. So if not is not true, or not is not none, or if not is Johnny equals. And some things will change that will get into booleans, and that will help us with booleans. Because if I take away this not, it's gone. So that I need to end this before I keep rambling. So this has been Kumu Coding. Hopefully you like coding. I'm not I'm not editing any of these. Sorry, these are going to be raw, full of full of a lot of random rambles. So this has been Cool Move Coding. Hopefully you've learned about variables and if. I would recommend you messing with these to a degree you feel comfortable. If, else, and else if. Pretty easy to remember. You're going to be using them frequently in code to test and compare different variables as well, which I did not talk on, but as a quick demonstration, same. You can run that for yourself to see what happens, and I'm not going to run it to you, because I want you to test and mess with things and try things for yourself. Find the way that works for you. That's all I can say to how you learn. Hands-on, visual, reading, don't get me wrong, smelling, because some people can uh, link sense to visual and audio and hearing of information. So I'm going to leave it there. The variable if, hopefully you will like coding as much as I do and love coding or figure out coding. There is so much to do in this world for coding. There's so much to learn. Don't be discouraged in coding. You don't have to be the brightest. Don't try to shine bright in this world either. Work at your own pace. Do your own pace. Paste. Pace. P-A-C-E, I believe. As you can see, I'm not the perfect, or I am not a perfect person. I do not speak perfectly. I do not try to be perfect. I may catch myself and have my own little qualms and quirks about myself, but do not discourage. Do not get discouraged. Hopefully, you'll come back to watching me make a fool of myself again, or learn something. Either way, you are taking knowledge that most people can't comprehend. Python makes things easier. PyCharm makes things easier. Just keep doing it. Keep going. You will find a way. This has been Kumu. I'm going to stop my rambling, and you have a wonderful day, and you be a cool coder. So I had that one in the books for a while I wanted to use, but have a wonderful day.